Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Jamala, we meet today in quite unprecedented circumstances. The British Muslim community is facing a terrible shock in the press this last few days. Blatant, rampant Islamophobia here in Westminster from some of the top echelons of government. Is this the new norm in Westminster?
Oh, well, look, I think the first thing to say is that the comments that Lee Anderson, the Tory Member of Parliament, made a few days ago were completely unacceptable. It is Islamophobia. You need to call it what it is if you are going to be able to deal with the problem. And I think what's been the most disappointing thing over the last couple of days is the hesitancy in the Tory party to call this what it is, to call out racism for being racism. I think the Prime Minister, his Deputy Prime Minister and other senior members of the government are dancing on the head of a pin, trying everything they can to call out the comments, but without calling them what they are. And I think that's wrong, because if you can't name a problem, you can't really very much go about fixing it. And I think that is causing huge concern, not just in the Muslim community, but I think across minority communities in this country, because in the end, what affects one community that is a minority affects all other minorities too.
It goes without saying, though, as much as the Conservatives are in the headlines, pardon the pun, it's not all rosy with the Labour Party right now. I mean, nationally, the polls are very much in favour of the party. You're leading the way. Yet recent surveying among the British Muslim community by Survation revealed a pretty shocking drop, 23% drop in Muslims identifying as Labour, the Labour Party being the party that they would vote for. I mean, how on earth can British Muslims identify with the Labour Party based on that poll result?
Oh, well, look, I mean, I think that, of course, the issue of Gaza has been having a huge impact both at home and abroad. I'm sure that's something we're going to go on to discuss in much more detail. I think that the British Muslim community, just like every other community in this country, has a right to expect representation here at Westminster, and are the same as everybody else, in terms of the bread and butter concerns that affect all of our citizens, whether that's the economy, whether that's education, access to opportunity, all the things that affect British Muslims primarily affect all other citizens of our country as well. And of course, in the Labour Party, we want to be able to win votes from every part of our country, north, south, everywhere in between, and we want votes from every single community in our country, and that includes the British Muslim community. There isn't a single community where we want to say, do you know what, not for us. Absolutely, that is not the Labour way. The Labour way is votes from everyone, everywhere, and we would of course fight for every vote. I take nothing for granted. It's clear that we have much more work to do in order to win back some votes that we've lost recently, and of course I'll be making sure I play my full part in doing that for the party as well.
We're talking about trying to regain that trust and playing roles and parts. I mean, on the 15th of November, as you'll recall, the Scottish National Party put forward an amendment to the King's speech, openly calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Now, several of your colleagues defied the whip. Why did you abstain from that vote?
Oh, well, look, I wanted a ceasefire then, and I want a ceasefire now. I think that's the first point to make. I think it's impossible to look at footage coming out of Gaza of dead children or injured children or children who have been orphaned, and to not want that horror, that absolute tragedy to stop. And I think that the numbers tell their own story. We've got over 29,000 people who have died. Over 12,000 of those are children. So we're just seeing layer of tragedy upon tragedy. And like millions of people, I want that to stop. And I wanted it to stop then, and I want it to stop now. So you can call it a ceasefire, you can call it a truce, you can use the words immediate, you can use the word permanent, you can use the word sustainable. What you're describing is a desire to see the fighting stop. And as I say, I share that desire. I think when it comes to voting and what you're calling for in Parliament in particular, if you're in the government or if you're in the shadow government, you have to think about how you're going to deliver it, because calling for a ceasefire is not the same as seeing a ceasefire actually happen. And I think you have a responsibility when you're both in the government or the shadow government to think about those concrete steps that are needed to actually make a ceasefire a reality on the ground. And that is what I had in my mind when we were voting in November. We abstained on the Scottish National Party's motion, but we voted for a Labour motion at that time, which set out the best available process at that time that could have delivered, and in fact did deliver, deliver a stop in the fighting. We saw the Qatari and US initiative that got us a truce, which we wanted to see go on for longer if that had been possible. Sadly, it wasn't then, but I voted for the process that I thought could deliver the stop to the fighting, and that is what we have sought to do all the way through, because the ceasefire, when it happens, will be as a result of a difficult, delicate diplomatic process. And I think that in my role in the shadow government, you have a responsibility to try and support those processes.
You mentioned obviously there was the other vote last Wednesday, which Labour put forward. It was a motion calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. We saw in front of us the House erupted, frankly, into chaos for various reasons, which I think would take up the whole interview to discuss, perhaps on this occasion. But ultimately it did go through, fundamentally due to the number of shouts of aye in favour of that motion. Look, protocol aside, who was behind this? Who was behind this wording and initiative?
Well, it's a Labour motion. So it's a Labour Party that is behind a Labour motion. It was supported by over 140 Labour members of Parliament put their name to that motion. It's quite unusual to get such a large number of signatures to that motion. And I know that the scenes on Wednesday night were disappointing and did not reflect well on Parliament as a whole. But I think the important thing to recognise is that night, last Wednesday, a motion passed in the House of Commons calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. And I think that is the most important takeaway from the evening. I also suspect very strongly that one of the reasons why we saw those scenes erupt and the government effectively collapse the expectations on voting is because the government could not hold its majority on our motion. I believe that a number of Tory members of Parliament wanted to vote for the Labour motion. And if that had happened, then I think the government of the day would have been in quite significant trouble. So I think there was politics behind the reason why those scenes were seen by us all, but actually the fundamentals are that a motion passed in the House of Commons, and actually I suspect that if there was a free vote on this matter, you'd see a lot of Tories, and that would mean there is a majority of members of Parliament, not just in opposition parties, but potentially in the government party that support an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. And I think that's a very important takeaway when you look at the UK government's position overall.
We can acknowledge that, but I think we've got to home in here. Somebody had a part to play behind the scenes in this, okay? You know, there are whispers that there were certain Muslim Labour Party MPs behind this, those that abstained, including yourself. There were some, significant high-profile members of the Shadow Cabinet and junior Shadow Cabinet members who still hold those positions. They weren't so-called sacked or had to forced to resign. Surely between you guys, you must have come together and said, this is just not enough. The party position has to be more firmer on this situation.
Well, I think there's been an ongoing conversation, and those of us who are serving members of the front bench and who are in the Shadow Cabinet, we've had our role to play in those internal conversations. I'm not going to lift the veil on internal conversations, particularly at Shadow Cabinet, but this matter has been discussed regularly, as you would expect, within the Shadow Cabinet, and there are always frank, robust, respectful exchanges of views at Shadow Cabinet, and I'm very pleased to be able to play my part and bring my perspective to those discussions. But look, it's a Labour Party motion. I was very proud to put my name to a Labour Party motion calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, and I think it's important to recognise that we've had a shift in our position, and that's because the situation on the ground has shifted, and I think that there is this window of opportunity within the sort of diplomatic processes that have been taking place, where if more countries, including the UK, are able to join that call for an immediate ceasefire, we might actually be able to deliver it. So it goes right back to the question of what is the best mechanism to make a ceasefire happen? And because of the situation on the ground, because ourselves and many others around the world are very clear that the situation in Rafah, ground offensive in Rafah, cannot go ahead, must not go ahead, and the way that the position of, say, the Canadians or the Australians or the New Zealanders has changed, I think that creates an opportunity, and I think it's important we all try to seize the moment and do everything we can to try and bring a ceasefire about.
The SNP's motion called for, quote, a ceasefire. Labour's motion called for, quote, a humanitarian ceasefire. What is the difference, please? And can you please clarify once and for all, what is Labour's position on the historic Israel-Palestine conflict?
Well, I don't really think there is much of a difference between most of the words that are being used, immediate ceasefire or immediate humanitarian ceasefire. They are effectively the same thing. The Labour Party motion and the wording that we have used is more, I guess, reflective of the way that these matters are discussed at the UN and in diplomatic arenas where these discussions are taking place. So our language is much more in keeping with the way that diplomatic language is often used in these matters. And I think our motion was stronger because I think it went much further than the SNP motion because it didn't simply ask for a ceasefire. We were very clear that the ground offensive in Rafah must not, cannot, under any circumstances, go ahead. We were calling upon the Israeli government to abide by the findings of the International Court of Justice, which I think is incredibly important because in the end, it is international law that is the thing that binds us all together on the world stage. And then also we were looking at the best mechanism to try and make sure that any ceasefire that is achieved is in fact permanent. So how do you get a permanent ceasefire? Well, for that you need the peace process. You need to be able to engage in those diplomatic negotiations for a two-state solution with a safe and secure Israel, but a viable, strong Palestinian state as well, and where the recognition of Palestine as a state takes place as part of a contribution to a peace process and not at the end of a peace process. Because in the end, self-determination for the Palestinian people is the inalienable right of the Palestinian people. It is not in the gift of their neighbour, not Israel nor anybody else, and it is a right that they have and a right that is there to be realised, we believe, as a contribution to a peace process. So for the Labour Party, our position is that we want to see a two-state solution with a safe and secure Israel, a viable Palestinian state. We will recognise the state of Palestine as a contribution to a peace process, and this will be a priority for a Labour government.
I appreciate you clarifying the position now. I just want to rewind a bit, if we may. 13th of October, you issued a statement regarding Israel's response to the Hamas terror attacks on October the 7th. We must not forget that killed over 700 innocent civilians. In your statement, if I may quote, you said it was clear that a humanitarian crisis was unfolding. So with respect, why hasn't the world heard from you? If we go back to looking at your local correspondence, we verified that you've had some local correspondence in your constituency, like many of your colleagues. But within this very house, we are sitting in the mother of all parliaments. In this very house, based on what we've looked through the archive of Hansard, you've only spoken 3 times since then, and on matters, frankly, that have nothing to do with Gaza. Can you explain this, please?
I'm a member of the Shadow Cabinet. I am the Shadow Lord Chancellor and Shadow Justice Secretary, so all of the contributions that I've been making in Parliament relate to my justice portfolio. We have a convention whereby if you're in the Shadow Cabinet, you speak from the dispatch box on your own portfolio. You do not speak on the portfolios held by your other colleagues in the Shadow Cabinet. So with respect, the person who's been leading for the Shadow Cabinet and speaking for all of us on this matter is my colleague David Lammy. He is the Shadow Foreign Secretary, as well as Lisa Nandy, who is our Shadow International Development Minister. So you will see me speaking about justice matters because that is my brief in Parliament, and that is the convention by which members of Parliament operate in this place. The rules are different for other junior members of the front bench and the rules are different for backbenchers. So if there's any confusion about that, let me clear that up right now. That is to do with the fact that I am a serving member of the Shadow Cabinet. I'm the Shadow Lord Chancellor and I speak on those matters. But I have been communicating regularly with my constituents who've been writing to me, as you would expect, and as I respect their right to do so, about this incredibly important issue. I've been in regular correspondence with my constituents. And I have, of course, been taking part in many of the conversations that have been taking place in Westminster, even if they are not on the floor of the House of Commons itself or from the dispatch box. But as we were discussing a little earlier, there have been regular conversations about the Labour Party's response to the crisis in Gaza, and I have been playing my full part in those conversations.
How would, should I say, if Labour does come to government, how would Labour respond to this? Because fundamentally, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has made it very, very clear that he is rejecting calls for a Palestinian state in itself.
Well, look, part of the difficulty and part of the reason why this tragedy has had no end in sight for months now is because we lack partners for peace in that region. Benjamin Netanyahu is not a partner for peace. Hamas have not been partners for peace. You need partners for peace who are willing to take part in a political process to deliver a peaceful resolution that delivers a permanent ceasefire and a Palestinian state, so that the hopes and dreams of the people of Palestine can be recognised. You know, you need those who are representatives of both peoples to want to take part in those conversations. So it is difficult, and there's no point pretending here that a change of government to a Labour government is somehow magically going to make a ceasefire or a peace process happen. But this will be a priority for an incoming Labour government, and we will put our shoulder to the wheel to try and do our bit and everything that we can to support a peace process. In the end, the only way to resolve this issue, the only way to stop more violence, to stop the number of children dying or being made orphans, is a peaceful resolution, a peace settlement, a two-state solution.
Now, akin to the early 2000s, we've seen kind of the resurgence of quite left-wing activists, okay? And they're outright saying on social media that they want to punish the Labour Party, the party you're an MP for. What's your response to that sentiment?
Well, look, we're very lucky to live in a country where people have the right to protest, where people are able to express their wishes for government at the ballot box. We have a strong, very healthy democracy, and people are entitled within that democracy to have their own views, to form their own conclusions, and to use their vote as they see fit. And those are rights that I have always supported and I will always support, even if that means that people, are not willing to vote for the Labour Party. In the end, the right to vote is incredibly important and is something that I will always stand up for. I think that legitimate protest, legitimate campaigning, that's something we can all get behind, even if we might have disagreements with each other. But there is a political space for those disagreements to happen. What we can't see happen is the behaviour of a very small minority, and it is a small minority, to effectively tar everybody with the same brush. So there are some individuals who have engaged in things that I think go beyond legitimate campaigning and legitimate protest, where people have been making very serious threats to the safety and security of MPs who haven't behaved as they wanted them to. I know that many people have had death threats, an impact on the safety and security of MPs' families. That's obviously something that's been discussed a lot in the last 48 hours or so. And it is important that we can all unite around saying that that is a red line that should not be crossed. People should not engage in threatening or intimidatory behaviour, because that is not how the parliamentary process works. But absolutely legitimate campaigning, legitimate disagreement, legitimate protest, that's something I will always stand up for, no matter who it's coming from and no matter who it is aimed at.
But do you get the anger within some sections of the Muslim community?
I absolutely understand that people feel very passionately about what's going on, and some people are feeling very angry. A lot of people feel hurt. Some people feel disappointed. I understand and I hear all of those emotions and perspectives from people within the Muslim community. And I think that's legitimate. People are entitled to their own reactions to what's going on, and people are entitled to their own views about that as well. What I would say is, if we can have more respectful conversations and acknowledge that there are differences of viewpoint, I think that makes us all stronger. Even if you still don't agree at the end of that process, I think that's fine. That's something I've always stood up for myself. But we should all be able to draw a line between the majority, the clear majority that would be in that space, and the small minority that I think are engaging in tactics with threats of violence, which I think are not only illegal, but which are damaging to the pro-Palestinian cause. And this is a cause I have supported my whole life, certainly for the whole of my political life. The Palestinian cause is a just cause. The people of Palestine deserve justice, and I don't think that any campaigning that takes away from the justice of that cause is something that anybody should get behind.
You've been an MP since 2010. Formerly were the national campaign coordinator of your party. You sit as the Shadow Justice Secretary. We're very, very close now to a general election. It's inevitable. It has to happen at the end of this Parliament this year. It's very, very unusual for a reshuffle to occur again. One would assume there won't be another reshuffle. So you could potentially become the first BAME Lord Chancellor, first female and BAME Justice Secretary, potentially going to be sitting at the cabinet table as a cabinet minister later this year. How are you going to use that status, potential status, to champion members of our community, members of the BAME community who've planted their trust in you and believe in you?
Oh, well, I think the first thing to say is, if there's anything I've learned in my career in politics is that anything can happen. So I take nothing for granted, and I don't just say that as like a checklist exercise. There you go, I said it. Now move on to the substance of the question. I think there is a long way to go between now and the general election, and I think, given the result that the Labour Party had in 2019, we have to pull off a history-making election win, which I believe we can do, but as I say, I don't take that for granted. And in the end, it is up to our leader, who he has served in his cabinet ultimately. But if I am lucky enough and privileged enough to be in the position of being both the Lord Chancellor and the Justice Secretary for this country, I would want to play my full part, not just in fulfilling the demands of that particular department and that portfolio, and doing so in a way that's in accordance with Labour Party values, but I would also take very seriously the broader responsibility that I have as a British Muslim in political life. But that's actually not something that's connected to being potentially in the cabinet or now in the shadow cabinet. That's a responsibility I feel like I have tried my best to fulfil from the moment I was selected as a Labour candidate, when it became apparent to me that whilst my focus was just on Ladywood constituency and the people that live there, it was clear that there was a desire from a broader range of people to see representation. And I think representation matters, and it's something that maybe wasn't in my mind when I was running for the first time, but it's a responsibility that soon presented itself, and it's something that I have always tried to take very seriously. I try always to give voice to the perspective of the minority community I belong to, but also of minorities more broadly. And it's something that I've always wanted to do right. So wherever I am, whichever room I'm sitting in, that is something that is always on my mind.
The New Statesman recently described you as the unofficial leader of the Labour Party's 14 Muslim MPs. How important is Islam to you?
Oh, I think they're two separate questions. I'll deal with the second half latterly, if I may. Just look, I'm a member of the Shadow Cabinet. I'm the only Muslim in the Shadow Cabinet. I think I'm probably the only Muslim in both the Cabinet and the Shadow Cabinet combined, actually, because I don't think the Tories have any Muslim representation left at the top of their party. That is a responsibility I take very seriously. But to be absolutely clear, there is no leader of the Muslim MPs in Parliament. We are all individuals, and we do work together, and we all try to collaborate and partner up with each other when we think that's going to be helpful. But there isn't a leader, so I just want to be very clear about that. I'm not the leader, official or unofficial or otherwise. Secondly, on faith itself, Islam, my own religion, like a lot of practicing Muslims, my faith is the most important thing in my life. It is the absolute driver of everything that I do. I feel a very strong calling of my own conscience, and my conscience calls me to God. That is how I know that I'm a Muslim. I always say I know that I properly grew up and was a proper grown-up in my own right when I knew with every fibre of my being that I am a Muslim, no longer just because my mum and dad are Muslims and they raised me as a Muslim, because my conscience calls me to God. It's no longer just my upbringing alone. This is personal to me, and I think that when I had that realization in my early 20s, I understood who I am, what my purpose is, and what life is all about. And no matter where I am in the world, no matter what I am doing, with that calling of my own conscience, I will always know who I am.
Do you fear Yom Kippur and the Judgment Day?
Of course. I mean, we're Muslims. We're taught that our life is a gift and it is a test, and that there is an accounting at the end of your life. But actually, it's not something that I just think about as a future problem, something to worry about when the world has ended and everybody is being judged by God. I think or certainly this is how I have always approached Islam, and this is how I was taught and raised. That sense of having to account for what you're doing is something that lives with you every day, and in everything you say and in everything that you do. And I was taught as a child, God is everywhere. God sees everything. God knows you better than yourself. So there's no hiding. Everything that you're doing, you can say something to other people, but the truth of your heart is known to you, and it is known to God. And that has always shaped the way that I approach. It's not just about politics and professional life, it's personal life. It's shaped the way that I look at the world, the way that I look at my own behaviour. And I think that that has helped centre who I am and my sense of who I am as a Muslim.
Beyond being an Oxford graduate, respected barrister, senior Muslim MP, who is Shabana Mahmood? And what's your goal?
Oh gosh. Well, I am. I suppose in a way it's connected to the job that I'm doing right now. Okay, I am somebody who is trying to take the advantages that I have been given, the privileges, the gifts from God, the education, the sort of professional background, and I'm trying to use it for good. As Muslims, I believe that those things that you've been given are a test. It's a test. You have to account for it. You have to show what you did with it. I can't just sit back and think, great for me, I went to Oxford. It's an amazing university. I've had a brilliant, wonderful education. It's not there for me to chalk that up and think there's something special about me. There isn't anything special about me. That's a test. The test is, what am I going to do with it? What will I use it for? And I've always tried to use the privileges I've been granted, ultimately by God, those privileges for good and in public service, because I think that public service is the best way to try and help the most people in the most significant way possible. I think that if we are able to form a government, if we are lucky enough to win a general election, if I'm able to be in the government of this country, I will be trying to use that for good, to try and change our country for the better, so that more of our people have all of the opportunities that I have been blessed with.
A very polished answer. What's the one thing we don't know about Shabana Mahmood?
Oh gosh, these are difficult questions. I have a penchant for Pakistani drama serials. It's helped my Urdu improve immeasurably. There you go.
Are we going to name any favourites?
Well, I'm happy to name favourites, but I think I might cause a bit of debate on amongst your viewers.
Shabana Mahmood, Member of Parliament for Ladywood, Shadow Justice Secretary and Shadow Lord Chancellor, thank you for talking to us here on British Muslim TV.
Thank you, Jazakallah.